1878. A Cree hunter treks through the thick Canadian snow. It's been 3 days since his last meal, and just as many since he had a warm bed. This year has been horrible, and mass starvation has ravaged the Cree people. His feet and hands are frozen. However, despite his pain, the hunter remains focused. "I'll find something soon," he mutters to himself. But his thoughts don't mean too much. He's muttered that phrase since day one, but this time he means it. At the rate he's going, it needs to be true. And after a few more moments, his heart begins to beat with excitement. No, he didn't find an elk or a moose, but maybe something better. A small cabin nestled deep in the woods. With a deep breath, he makes his way towards the cabin and enters. An uncanny stench wafts through the open door, and the hunter falls to his knees. The cabin is surprisingly clean for the smell. In fact, it's extremely bare, with just one large pot on the stove. Normally he would call out to the owner and ask for help, but not this time. Food is much more important right now. He walks over to the pot and opens it. The stench of death surrounds him. The hunter, a grizzled veteran who's seen the worst of the worst, takes off running, as what he saw in the pot would haunt the man for the rest of his life. Hello, my name is Joseph Palmer, and today I wanted to discuss one of the most disturbing cases I have come across so far, about a man named Swift Runner who devoured his family. Now, I think this goes without saying, but I will be discussing some pretty disturbing details in this video. So if it is a bit too much, and I completely understand, please consider checking out other videos on my channel, as it would mean a lot. And if you wouldn't mind subscribing to get more videos like this in the future, I would certainly appreciate it. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the case of the man who ate his family. Swift Runner was a talented hunter and trapper, frequently trading his skins and wares at the Hudson's Bay Company. There he met and befriended many officers, and in 1875, even served as a guide for the Northwest Mounted Police. By all accounts, Swift Runner was a kind and well-liked man, who was a talented hunter, and acted lovingly to his wife and 6 children. He was also physically imposing, with a muscular build and standing well over 6 feet tall, which was unusual for the time. As a young man, he received a solid and useful Cree education, which taught him how to survive in the harsh Canadian wilderness, hunting and trapping some of North America's most dangerous game. His life was pretty happy and relatively peaceful, but the good times did not last forever. 1878 was a time of starvation for the Cree people, and Swift Runner and his family suffered as well. The family went days without eating. At first they managed staying positive. Swift Runner would leave, confident that he would find something, but most days ended up with him returning home empty. He would catch a rabbit or a squirrel here and there, but it wasn't enough to support such a large family. One night Swift Runner returned home and was so tired he collapsed just outside his bedroom. When he was passed out, he dreamed of sitting at his table, devouring a large meal. The meat tasted great, and he couldn't get enough. Once his plate was empty, He went back to the stove to grab more. However, as he opened up the pot, a scream left his mouth. He was staring at the severed head of his youngest daughter. Swift Runner woke up from his nightmare. He put on his moccasins and coat and left to hunt. Like usual, he returned empty-handed. The dream he had the night before came back again, and again the next night. But something happened. With each dream, he grew less and less terrified and disgusted about what he was doing, and even grew excited to dream about devouring that meat. Finally, the dreams weren't good enough, and he needed the real thing. The police started to hear stories in the spring. A Cree chief said Swift Runner had turned cannibal, and a hunter reported that Swift Runner's entire family had been killed in the woods. But a squad of officers who went out to investigate couldn't find Swift Runner or his family. Instead, Swift Runner went to the police himself in the spring, telling them his wife had committed suicide and the rest of his family had died of starvation. But the officer noticed that Swift Runner didn't look starving. Quote, "The prisoner arrived at our camp in the spring and did not look very poor or thin, or as if he had been starving." Suspicious of the story, police traveled with Swift Runner to his family's camp. At the cabin, Swift Runner took one of the officers to a small makeshift grave and informed him that his son was buried there. The officers dug up the grave and saw it was undisturbed. However, as time went on, officers found more and more discarded bones around the property. When confronted, Swift Runner finally admitted to what happened. And remember how I said I would be discussing some pretty disturbing details? Well, here's what Swift Runner claimed happened to his family. At first, Swift Runner became haunted by dreams. A Wendigo spirit called on him to consume the people around him. The spirit crept through his mind, gradually taking control. Then, the Wendigo killed and ate Swift Runner's wife. With this accomplished, the Wendigo forced one of Swift Runner's boys to kill and butcher his younger brother. While enjoying his grisly meal, the spirit hung Swift Runner's infant son by the neck from a lodge pole and tugged at the baby's dangling feet. It was later shown that he had also done away with Swift Runner's brother and his mother-in-law, though he acknowledged she had been a bit tough to eat. The officers were of course disturbed to their very core, and hauled Swift Runner away to Fort Saskatchewan. The trial began on August 8, 1879. The judge and jury did not view the Wendigo idea in the same light as the Cree. They saw Swift Runner as a murderer, and the trapper made no attempt to hide his guilt. Magistrate Richardson quickly sentenced him to be hanged. But there was one problem. They've actually never conducted an execution. The Hudson's Bay Company did hang an employee for murder, but this was the first formal execution in Western Canada. Staff Sergeant Fred Badgley was in charge of carrying this out. A gallows was erected within the fort enclosure at Fort Saskatchewan. An old army pensioner named Rogers was made hangman. On the appointed morning, a bitterly cold December 20th, Swift Runner was led to the scaffold. There was a large crowd that gathered eagerly awaiting the man to die. He was given the opportunity to address the crowd. Swift Runner admitted his guilt and thanked the guards for their kindness. Apparently the officers did a great job with the hanging, as a California Spectator named Jim Reed said, quote, "That's the purest hanging I've ever seen." and it's the 29th. An article detailing Swift Runner's last walk gives us an insight to the day of the hanging, including the number of people in attendance, 60, and the weather, swirling snow. I'll attach it here if you want to take a look. Swift Runner was reported to be a kind and hardworking man who loved his family. However, under the stress of extreme hunger, something overtook the man, and he did the unthinkable. And although his crimes took place over 100 years ago, I can only hope that his family were able to find peace in the hereafter.